Testing 1, 2, 3. Testing 1, 2, 3. Okay. Talk, 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 talk. Okay. It's 1 o'clock Eastern time by my watch, so I think we'll start. First of all, good morning or good afternoon, depending on where in the world you are. Really happy you were able to make it here today. Really excited to talk to you about some strategies that you can employ to win on mobile marketplaces, regardless of whether that's the Windows marketplace, excuse me, the iOS App Store or the Android Store marketplace, whatever. There's lots of opportunities to really do some good. So hopefully this is right up your alley and we can move forward. So really this presentation, I'm going to discuss a few things with you around ways that you as a mobile app developer can sort of take advantage of marketplaces to market your app, to make your app more popular, and to generally just make your app more successful, whether that's things to do inside the marketplace or things that you can do outside of the marketplace. So this is going to be a fun little session, I think, for everybody here. So my name is Paul LaBerge. I did a session earlier today, so if you joined that session as well, welcome back. Really happy that you're here, and hopefully some of you also watched the Web Matrix session that Fred just gave as well. It's tough to start before Fred, and it's tough to go after Fred because he's so awesome, and that rugged beard of his makes him look more lumberjack-like, so I think that's pretty cool. But anyways, I digress. I'm a technical evangelist, and what that means is my role at Microsoft is to help folks such as yourselves understand our platform and how you may not be even on our platform, but to really understand what our platform can do for you, not to replace what you're doing, but to add on and provide new opportunities and everything else like that. So if you have any questions, feel free to ask them during the presentation. I'll get to them after. Or if you're not comfortable asking questions in a public forum like this, feel free to give me an email or start following me on Twitter or whatever, or send me a note on Twitter, and then we can move forward like that. So without further ado, let's go. All right, so as I said before, what we're going to talk about, there's a few things that we're going to talk about. One is, idea of where are you publishing your app. So there's some strategies around why you would do this. We're also going to talk about what I call the art of the upsell, and that's really all about trials and how you implement them and why you would implement them, or why you would not in some cases, but in most cases I would say you probably want to. Then we're going to talk about pricing strategy. So one of the biggest thing as a developer, you've built this great app, and then you're looking at the screen and you're thinking to yourself, what do I charge for this app? Because you may not know. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the ideas behind how you price an app and everything else like that. Not going to really talk too much about differentiation because that's more of a user experience thing, but I'm happy to talk about those after the fact. To be honest, differentiation, I talked a little bit about that in my previous session on designing mobile apps that don't suck. So if you did not see that session, feel free to watch it on demand after the fact. But and then finally, the last thing we are going to talk about is how to get promoted. Right. So every single app store marketplace for mobile applications has their own methods and madness around how do you actually promote apps, and how can you be in that select circle of apps to be promoted. So we're going to talk a little bit about those types of things. So let's talk about the primer. Right, so let's face it, everybody here probably loves to build apps, right? Whether that's iOS, Android, BlackBerry, Migo, Windows Phone, web apps, Slate apps, whatever it is, even cloud apps, whatever it is that you decide to do, right? We all get a kick around building applications. It's what we do, right? We think it's cool, it's awesome to see, this creation that you've really thought about and sort of gone through the blood, sweat, and tears of actually building this app, learning in the process too, I'm sure. And the whole process of that is interesting because what it does is, by the end of it, you have this great creation that you can make use of. And so here we are, we're crying tears of joy, and we love playing with apps, we love building them and things like that. But there is a bit of a reality check here as well, right? So you may already know this. I alluded to this actually in my previous session, but only 26%, so 1 in 4 basically, of all mobile apps downloaded ever get opened more than once. That's kind of tough odds, right? So what that means is that the average user is downloading your app, takes a look at it, and just goes, meh, or it says, oh, that's pretty cool, but never goes back to it. And eventually, through misuse, or unuse, I should say, eventually they probably delete it off their phone. So there's a lot of things that you can do to sort of mitigate the issues that you might see around trying to get a user to use your app more than once. Because ultimately, let's face it, even if they bought your app and they only use it once, that's a failure for you, right? Because the whole idea is that you want them to get to use your app. You want them to get to know how you build things, because down the road, if you build further apps, even if they paid for the specific app that you've built, you know, your name and cachet around building apps and the experience that people have around that app can be a pull through for users to actually buy further apps of yours. So just keep that in mind. So as we said before, you know, a user is willing to download your app, but if it's not awesome, you know, it's basically dead to the user, and that's really what the issue here is that we're trying to sort of solve, right? You want users to make use of your app. It's not just enough for them to download it. It's not just enough for them to buy it. It's not just enough for them to do any of that. You want them to use your app. So around that, obviously you have to have a great idea, right? You know, but it's only half the battle. The unfortunate truth is, you know, lots of people have ideas, and ideas are very often, you know, great intentions, but you know, sometimes it's very tough to actually implement those ideas for various different reasons, whether it's time constraints that you might have, the ability to learn new platforms or whatever, or new sort of ways of doing things, or you know what, you know, you get halfway through and you realize it's not such a great idea after all and everything. So, and it's also important to realize that, you know, very few apps make enough money to break even, and that's an unfortunate truth as well. But like I said, there's some ways that you can sort of, you know, game the system, if you pardon the pun, around making your app more palatable to users. First, to find your app on the App Store. Second, to download your app, because it's not enough for them to find it. You have to convince them to actually download it. And then three, to make use of the app over and over and over again, right? So how do you make your idea come to fruition and make it successful? And I think that's the crux of what we're going to be talking about here today. So the answer is, and you might groan by this title, marketing. It does matter, right? We're all developers, designers, publishers. We have these mobile apps and everything else like that. We're great for code. We're great for design. We're great for, you know, figuring out exactly how we're going to build this amazing creation that we call our application. But once the application is in market, or even before for that matter, what are you doing to make sure that users know about it and make them want to download it, right? So you think a lot about the functionality of the apps and everything else like that, but if you don't have the users know that your app even exists, then that's obviously an issue, and that's something that needs to be fixed. So who is your app's target audience? That's the first part that you have to figure out. Well, you know, you might think about it, yeah, it's actually makes sense, you know, it's an easy question to answer, but is it really an easy question to answer? Think about it. You built this app, this great idea, right? What is your target audience? Like, who is your ideal user of your application? So if you haven't thought about it before, now's the time to probably think about it, because, excuse me, if you don't think about these things, it actually makes it a little bit tougher for them for you to understand your users' behaviors or motivations, all those types of things, so that, you know, they're willing to download your app or even try to discover your app. Right, so it's maybe not necessarily a very good, easy question. And as you can see here, there's lots of various different types of users, right? You have professionals, you have soccer moms, you have, you know, individuals that are into athletics, you know, maybe you have Spaceman Spiff, as you can see here, and things like that. You know, these are all different types of people that have various different interests, and like they're very varied. Like, it's very possible that one type of user that you feel that you're targeting is extremely different from another type of user that you're targeting. So how do you actually make up for that gap between those two user bases, and really think hard about what are the various different types of users that you're really trying to target. Don't boil the ocean, as they say. So don't try to make your app palatable to every single user that's out there in the universe, because it's never going to happen. make sure that you've tailored the experience to the specific target audience that you have. And for your consideration, there's a whole bunch of things that you can think about, right? So age, where do they live, what is the scenario that the user will actually use your application? Affiliations, such as political, if you're building an app that's about conservative politics, chances are you're probably not going to get a whole bunch of liberal people actually there, and a whole bunch of other things, right? So that's really important to think that. So with that, let's move to trials, right? So one of the things that Windows Phone actually did with their implementation of the platform and the app ecosystem is they actually implemented something called trial mode, which is actually an API call that you can use within your application to determine whether or not your app is a trial. Now you can build that yourself and things like that, but it is something that is really, really useful. And we're going to get into discussions around how you build trials, not just on Windows Phone, but also on the other platforms as well, and why you should think about trials and why it's important. So without further ado, let's move into that. So if you're thinking about charging for your app, so I'm not talking about ad-supported versions of your app or free apps that you're just building, but if you're actually charging a price for your application for users to download, I strongly, strongly encourage you to actually implement a trial for it, right? So the buyer beware idea really doesn't fly that well. Users are kind of finicky, and I have a slide about this a little bit later on that's actually quite interesting around the behaviors of users and things like that, and how they approach the purchase of apps and everything, right? So you want to make it as frictionless as possible for your users to actually buy your app. And one of the ways you can do that is to give them a taste of what your app's all about, right? Provide a trial. So giving them a chance to try the application before they buy it is not a bad thing at all. It depends on your business model and exactly what your motivations are, for sure, I get that. But outside of any specific case that you really don't want to have your users have a trial version of your app, which is, I don't think there's very many scenarios under which that would actually be relevant, in my opinion, but you should provide a trial, right? But I haven't really told you why, right? So this is where the slides get it. So I want to give you an example here around the way it works within the Windows Phone Marketplace, because this is data that I can actually provide, right? So what we found is that most applications within the Windows Phone Marketplace, and when I say applications, I also mean games, right? So just the whole ecosystem of apps and games within a marketplace or an app store. But in Windows Phone, the marketplace, most applications have trial mode, first of all. So they've actually implemented the use of the API, the trial mode API and everything else like that. But what we found is that applications that provide a trial mode within the Windows Phone app marketplace get 70 times the number of downloads than those that don't. So this is not an exact science, but I think directionally you can probably understand what I'm talking about here. The interesting thing around that is that 10% of the trials that people download actually convert to paid. And that is extremely, extremely high compared to what you would normally get, right? That means that you actually get 7 times the number of paid application sales than you would have otherwise. So I don't know about you, that kind of sounds like a good deal to me. Now, it may be a little bit different on each of the various platforms for their turnaround and from free to paid or trial to paid. But directionally, I think you can probably agree something like this would probably be the same across. So that's a really, really good reason why you should have a trial, because users are very, very reticent to actually make use of an application that they have to buy before, right? So screenshots are great, on the App Store, as well as descriptions, and you should do a very good job at doing that, but it's not enough. You need to give them a way to have a taste of what the application is all about. And we'll get into discussions around how you actually implement a trial and everything else like that, because there's various different ways, of course, around that as well. So here's, what's a trial, right? So there's different strategies around actually how to give users a trial app. So for example, use an in-app trial mode. So this is the general way that most Windows Phone applications work is the fact that they use the in-app trial mode API to actually determine. So basically what happens is within your code, it's your actual app that is a paid app, but you have a function call that says is trial, and it's just a Boolean result that comes back. And basically at that point, depending on what the result is if it is a trial, then you can limit whatever it is that you want to limit within the application so that you're not giving the entire application away. The other solution, and this is one that you see often on the iOS or the App Store from Apple, is create a whole new app on the app as a trial, right? So there's pros and cons to doing those different types of ways, whether it's in-app or outside of the app. But there are ways that you can actually provide trials, and it's interesting to determine which one is the best one for you. And I mean, you can sort of figure that out yourself. But in addition to the strategies, there's some tactics, right? So how do you implement a trial? So there's a difference between how you give a user a trial, but also how do you implement the trial in your application, right? One is the typical one, which is limiting the functionality, right? So you have an application that is a camera application, so you can take pictures and maybe you can do a whole bunch of filters on it, but then you can't save the picture. That's pretty limiting. So it gives you an idea of what the application can do. But the picture app that you built, it doesn't allow you to save the photos or share the photos over the web or anything else like that in trial mode. So therefore, it's a good reason why users would want to sort of pay for the app, for example. Another way is ad supported, right? So things that you can do for trial mode is you can actually provide ads within the trial. And we talk a little bit about this later, so I won't give it all away, but basically the whole idea is if you're giving away a trial, why not monetize that as well, right? Because there's ways that you can do that. Other ways that you can, provide trials, and I won't get into each of them, but, provide only X number of times that the user can open it and try it, or, it's time-bombed, or transactions, right? So, maybe the app is free, but, like the transactions or the service is not, and those types of things. And, other ways to do it. So there's different things that you can do around trial and implementing it. And by no means is this the only way that you can actually implement trials. These are just examples of how you can do that. But here are the principles, right? So if you decide you go forward with a trial, there's a few things that you should keep in mind, right? Don't give it away, right? The whole idea behind trial is not to provide every single piece of functionality and then for eternity and stuff like that, because then it's not really a trial. It's actually the full app, right? It's really important that when you create a trial of your application, you put some serious thought into what that actually means. So getting back to the previous slide, where you had all the tactics and everything else like that, really think about what that means, because there's lots of different ways that you can implement a trial. There is no single answer to the right way to implement a trial on your specific app, and I think that's really important, right? The second part to that is understanding the motivations that will entice a user to go beyond, right? So a trial is great, and maybe you have users that might be fine with the trial for whatever reason, and they may not decide to go to a paid app. So you really have to get inside the mind of your target user to figure out how you can actually convince them or have them see the value of paying for your app. It's not enough that that you provide the trial and then they stay on trial forever in some cases. In some cases, if you're doing ad monetization, there's actually some good reasons why you'd want to do that. A good example, actually, that just to digress a little bit, is there's a game on the Windows Phone marketplace called Dragon's Blade. I love the game. It reminds me of some of the console sort of based game, not console, but games on Commodore 64 and stuff like that. It's a fantasy game anyways, but it's pretty funny, because they have two versions of the application in the store. One is Dragon's Blade and the other one is Dragon's Blade DX. The Dragon's Blade DX game is actually the premium one that you have to pay for. The other one is ad supported, right? So there's actually no difference between the two. With the exception of the premium version doesn't have the ads and the regular version has ads. So they've actually decided to go down the route of saying that you can decide to pay for it or you can decide not to pay for it. Just be aware that you get the full game either way, but if you decide not to pay for it, you're going to have to deal with the ads. And for a lot of people that works, right? And that's the other thing, is you have to keep that in mind. And I get to this in the third part of this the slide, which is use ads, right? Use ads to monetize a trial, because if you're giving it away for free for whatever, however you decide to do it, you might as well make some money off of it at the same time, right? So keep that in mind. The last thing on this slide, and I'm getting into the middle of it, is making the trial compelling, right? So you've got to find the right balance around what is too much of a limiting of the functionality of the app so that the user can't figure out exactly what the value of the app is, as opposed to giving it all away, right? So the whole idea here is that you want to leave them wanting more. So say, I love this app, but I wish I could, use these filters on this photo cam app or something like that, right? Because that's where the real value is. Well, guess what? If you want those filters, then you can actually buy the app for $4.99 or $2.99 or whatever it is that you have, $1.99. So there's all sorts of things that you need to do. The main things that I would take away from the principles of the trial is, don't give it away, make it compelling, use ads when you're actually in the trial mode, because that way you get the best of both worlds. All right, pricing. Now this is where it gets a little tricky, right? So I'm sure a few of you have already been down this road, like if you're building an app and then you finally built it, maybe you hadn't even thought about what you're going to price it until after you've actually built the app. But the whole idea here is that, once you built the app and you're sort of staring at the screen, like I said before, going, well, what the heck am I going to charge for this thing? What's the value of it? It's tricky because you never know. So let's take a look at this. Pricing is a very risky proposition. There's lots of things that can go wrong, right? Good example is this. $1.99 for that? Are they crazy? I think I'll pass, right? Your users will bolt if the app price is too high. Makes sense. Likewise, 99 cents for an app that does whatever must not be very good. I think I'll pass. If you priced your app too low, again, users will bolt because they might have this false impression that your app is not valuable, like it's a piece of crap or something like that, rather than actually something that's good. You just underpriced it. So I think it's really important to try and find that sweet spot, and it's not a single digit number. Like it's not $1.99 is the right answer for your app. It's probably a range, and you have to figure out what that range is. And frankly, that range will depend on various different things as well. So just keep that in mind. So let's take a look at this. Perception is reality. Here's some ideas that you can actually use. So the average price for an iPhone app in the App Store in 2011 was $1.61, and that includes the price of the app, the charge that Apple puts on the app, as well as credit card fees and stuff like that for actually doing the transaction. It ends up being roughly around $1.61. It's probably gone up a little bit in 2012, but this is the information that I had. Cost of an extra large coffee at Tim Hortons is $1.90, right? And again, this is something you can probably see right now. Well, think about this, right? Users will go to Tim Hortons every day and not think of have a second choice or second thought about it. I just need a coffee and I'm just going to spend the $2 and go, right? To them, it's nothing. But you do the same, talk to the same person that's going to the App Store and finding an app that's like $1.99 or $1 or even 99 cents. They'll hum and haw and they'll take a look at it and go, oh, do I really want to buy this? Is it something that, it becomes, it's kind of asinine in a way, right? Like users' perception is something that's a little bit off base, They're willing to spend tons of money on coffee, that lasts like an hour at most, and then an app that they can have forever, that costs even less than potentially a coffee, they think about for 2 weeks before deciding whether or not they want it. The bottom line here is that users, when it comes to apps on mobile platforms, are skeptical and they expect a lot of value, right? In some cases, they expect more value than they should in certain price ranges, but that's the way it works. So something to keep in mind there as well. So how do you actually entice a user to pay for your app instead of buying that coffee, or doing both at this, and biting the bullet and actually buying the app and the coffee at the same time, right? So let's talk about the ones that are successful in monetizing apps, right? They have something in common, and I think the way to look at this is they do their homework. They understand, and they've done research, and they spent time actually figuring out exactly what their application is worth, how they can get it to their target audience, all those types of things, right? It's all about finding the true value of your app to your specific target audience. And a good example of this would be if you were building an app, it's all well and good to actually decide to, build it and then figure out after the fact how much you're going to charge for it and everything. Yeah, okay, I get that. Think of it like this, and I talk about this in this text right here, the franchise idea, right? So you want to buy a Tim Hortons franchise, for example. So you go to Oakville, where their headquarters is, for example, just as an example, and you knock on the door and say, here's my money, give me a franchise, and that's it. Well, it doesn't quite work that way. When you're actually building a business and a franchise, there's a number of things that you need to think about, right? So what are the franchise fees? Where can I be located? Is there competition from other stores that I have to think about? What are the recurring fees that are associated with that franchise, right? How much can I charge for my products? Is there a range, or is there something like that? All sorts of different things that are really important to being a successful business person in owning a franchise. Well, a lot of that is very similar to building a phone app, because you're really trying to build a business. Whether or not it's a formal business, it could be just a hobby and you built that app. But if you want to monetize it, it really becomes a business at that point, because there's tax implications and all that kind of stuff, right? So just keep that in mind when you're doing that. So would you do stuff without doing your research and for a franchise? No, of course not. But you probably might not do the same sort of rigor if you're building your app. Maybe you should. So let's talk about the 4 rules of pricing. 1, understand your addressable market. And we'll get into detail about these in the next few slides. 2, know your competition. If you don't know your competition, then you're going to be dead in the water. 3, and I talked about this already, treat your app like a business, right? Do the homework. Try to figure out how you can actually make money off of these things. And then 4th is always keep your options open. Be flexible. Embrace change, I guess they could say, right? Everybody's scared of change, but this is something that I think is really important for everybody to understand and to embrace. So, the first rule around the addressable market. So again, this goes around saying, okay, who is your target user? But it's also not just a target user, it's demographic, right? Does your app solve a problem that your target users might have? The answer may be no, in which case you probably should think at least what your target audience is, or address some of the functionality that your application currently has, so that you can address problems that you're trying to solve for your user's audience and stuff like that. The other part is around affluence, I guess you could say, for lack of a better term. Can they afford to spend money on your app, right? So once you've figured out who your target, your sweet spot sort of user is, does that type of user have the money to really spend on this type of app? Now, if it's like a 99-cent app, maybe it's not as much of an issue, but it is something to still keep in mind, because again, there's that perception is reality, kind of the Tim Hortons slide there, right? Coffee or an app. Chances are they'll be fine with buying the coffee, but the app is the other story altogether. And then finally, the third part to this is really interesting, is around not all markets are equal, right? So targeting users in your North American market, you may want to figure out exactly what that means. Is that the same user in Europe? Is it the same user in Asia? All those types of things. If you're going global with your application, you need to think about these types of things. Second is know your competition, right? Can you name the top 5 competitors or top X competitors within to your app? If you can't, you should probably figure out who they are, right? Because if you don't know who your competition is, you're probably doomed to failure already, because of the fact that you don't understand who is out there trying to solve the same problem you are and how they're solving it with their app, right? And how does that compare to your app? So I think that's really important. And when you compare your apps together, be honest and self-critical about it. So this is not a time for yourself to be nice to yourself. Be honest about taking a look at the competition and say, this app does X better than my app, or I do better at this than this app does. Find out where the pros and cons and stuff like that. That way, at least you know where the gaps are with your application and how you can sort of fix them. Now, when I say fix the gaps, I'm not saying copy or emulate the way the people, your competition has solved a certain part of the problem, but more along the lines of, these are things, areas that you can probably improve on, and use your own special sort of brain skills to try and figure out a way to be innovative and solve a problem in a better way, for example, those types of things. And then finally, know the future. And this one's a little bit tricky, right? So try to anticipate exactly how your competitors are going to evolve their application, because it's really important to understand, and I think a lot of you probably already know this, but an application is not a point-in-time thing, right? Users see value in applications that evolve over time. The whole point around it is, the app in version 1.0 may be very different from the app in version 4.0 or 5.0, for example, right? So the whole idea is, to evolve your application according to the environment that your application is trying to solve problems in, right? So your users' priorities may change and stuff like that, and if it makes sense for you to change your app, you should be aware of that, and you should anticipate those types of things ahead of time so that you can figure out exactly how you're going to fix or change the app going down the road. And this is all around road mapping your app. Okay. Rule number 3 is, treat your app like a business, and we talked a lot about that already, right? Market your app. It's kind of an interesting sort of thing for the average developer. I know it's something that I've had trouble wrapping my head around from time to time. Is you built an app or you built this thing, and it's true of any type of software, right? It's not enough to build this brilliant piece of software that does everything and puts butter on your toast in the morning as well, right? You need to market it, because without marketing, users will never ever find your app, especially if you're talking about apps in very, very mature app stores, like for example the Apple App Store. There's over I think 400,000 apps there. It's very tough to search and find an app that is your app in that sea of apps and games and stuff like that. So you need a way to make your application stick out. Right? The other thing is, try to estimate the volume of downloads your apps will get. And this will allow you to sort of figure out exactly what your costing will be, right? So this is all around how you actually cost it. So once you've figured out what you estimate your downloads will be on, say, for example, a monthly basis, a yearly basis, even a daily basis, depending on what you're doing, then you can figure out exactly, okay, well, what are the peaks in downloads and ebbs in downloads, right? So where are the peaks and valleys, I should say, ebbs and flows? The seasonality of your app. So is there a reason why your app might be very popular in a certain part of the year as opposed to others? A good example of that, tax, right? If you built an app that does your taxes, chances are you're going to have a lot of downloads around January to basically April, because that's tax season. And probably around the September-October timeframe, you're probably going to have very few people download the app. So it's around trying to figure out exactly, when you're going to be super busy and when you're not. And then finally, the second last thing, cost. So how much did it actually cost you to build this app outright from the get-go, right? So you can include things such as, did you have to buy a laptop, right? Did you have to buy the software? Did you have to buy a phone? Did you have to buy a membership to an app store or a marketplace or something like that? What about the software to build it? Did you need to buy software? Whether it's, tools to actually do the development, or whether it's imaging tools, or whatever it is that you have to do, source code control. What are the absolute costs that basically took you to actually, build your app? And that includes your time as well. So keep that in mind. And any time that you may have taken from others as well. And then finally, what are the carrying costs? So as your app evolves, as I said before, what are the things that you need to keep in mind around, how much does it cost to maintain your app and everything else like that? So basically what happens here is the bottom 4 bullet points on this slide: volume, seasonality, well, maybe not seasonality as much, but volume, cost, and carrying costs. Those 3 things will ultimately determine your break-even point. So just keep that in mind. Keep your options open. So this is all about flexibility and the ability to adapt to change, right? So your competition will evolve their product more than likely. You need to be prepared to do that for yours as well. I think that's a given. If your app becomes popular, keep in mind that you'll probably have to provide or get some people to help, right? So eventually, if your app is popular, it becomes actually a real business, right? So you may have to hire developers or marketers or business development people or whatever it is that you need, operational support, whatever, right? To actually help deal with the increasing volume of your or popularity of your app. Because as your app downloads become more popular, chances are you're going to have to field many more calls or emails around support or questions or whatever it is. So you need to be aware of that, right? And then finally, the last thing that you should probably think about here is partnerships, right? So be flexible and scalable through partnerships, whether that means providing an agency to help you build out certain pieces of functionality, or figuring out a partner that works best to help you move forward. Actually, the last thing I skipped over was lowering the price of your app. So be prepared at certain times, especially at times where you think that it's strategically possible to do this, around creating a sale to generate interest. So say, for example, you have an app that keeps track of football scores, right? So whether it's CFL football, NFL football, whatever, right? Or traditional football, soccer, as they say, around the finals and things like that, whether that's Super Bowl, Grey Cup, or Champions Leagues, cups and stuff. I'm not as familiar on the soccer side. I apologize for that. But basically, maybe your app, you create a sale saying, Super Bowl sale, and then you can generate, some interest that way. Because when you lower the price of your app, there's other apps in the App Store or Marketplace that actually keep track of that and say, oh, well, this app is now free for a second, or maybe not free, but reduced by $1 or whatever. And that actually brings some popularity to your app as well, so that they can download it. So tips. Once you've figured out, what you think your price range is, there's a few things to remember. Never, ever underprice your app, at least not underprice it badly, because if you underprice it very, very badly, you're going to end up in a situation where you're going to have to up the price, and that can result in bad PR, and then people get ticked because well, the app was 99 cents yesterday, now it's $5.99. Why is that, right? Think about starting pricing your app in the upper range, because you can always go down in price as well, and I think that's important to realize, right? So just make sure that the upper price isn't like way off. So if the true value of your app is say $2.99 or $3.99 in an app ecosystem, don't price it at $10.99. You can try $4.99 instead and see if that works, and then you can adjust downwards if you want to. The other thing is around experimenting in different prices in different geographies. So as I said before, maybe you decide to do a global rollout, but you want to do it in a phased approach, right? So for example, you may decide, I'm going to release my app in Canada first. It's a small, controllable sort of population, and maybe it makes sense for me to do that. I'll see how it goes before I actually release this app in the US, because I can make adjustments now in a smaller market instead of actually causing a whole bunch of ruckus in a larger market such as the US, which is similar in demographics and stuff like that between Canada and the US. Then you can sort of iron out the kinks. So that's something you can think about. And then we already talked about limited time sales for your app. Use that as a strategic lever for you to actually figure out when it might make sense for you to generate interest in your app by sort of pricing it down or something like that temporarily. How much time? I'm running out of time, so we've got to move. Okay, so getting promoted in the app stores, right? So there's basically three things that I think you need to worry about when you're actually getting promoted or want to get promoted. The first is functionality. Make sure that the functionality of your app is rock solid, right? It needs to solve the problem, it needs to solve it well, and it needs to do some interesting things with it, right? The utility. Is your app useful, right? Is it providing a visual impact? So is it fun to look at and use? Is it immersive and everything else like that? And then the main thing that gets people promoted are not the functionality. That's sort of the base case. Utility sort of helps with that, but you need to delight the user. And if you can delight the user with your application, you're going to be having a popular application, and the more popular you are, the more likely you are to get promoted. Right? Because the app stores basically look at downloads and everything else like that as part of their process. So let's talk a little bit about functionality. So there's a few things here, and there's three things that we're going to talk about here. Is core functionality. So does the application work as promised, right? So that's just core. And then the second part is content quality, right? So that can mean a whole bunch of different things, whether it's video content, regular content, whether it's how you display information and anything else like that. But say, for example, you're creating an RSS reader. Like, is the RSS reader that you're providing have quality and things like that? Is there a reason for that? That you might not be doing that, and if that's the case, you should probably provide a better idea around quality and everything. Then, finally, easy use. It has to be easy and intuitive to use your application, because if it's a nightmare to use, it'll never get promoted, because that'll make the App Store look really, really stupid, right? You're promoting this app that's completely unusable. Why would you do that, right? Utility is around incorporating mobile features and visual impact. I got a typo here in compelled, so I apologize for that. But basically, you can see it here, right? Feature set, visual impact, stickiness, and originality. And the one that I'm going to really sort of, I'm going to skip the first two, and I'm going to go to the last two. Stickiness is all around the stickiness of your app. Does your app provide the functionality and utility and intuitiveness around that make the user want to come back and back and back? Because, as I said before in the previous slide, downloads are one of the main measures that a lot of app stores sort of use to figure out whether or not an application should be promoted. But also they keep track of usage statistics, right? So does this it's not enough to say, well, this app had 1 million downloads over a period of a month or whatever. What about reuse? Like, are people actually using the app more than once? So that's the main thing. Originality makes sense, right? Does your application have something original and innovative that really stands out? So that's a way to sort of make it possible for your application to really stand out and everything else like that. And then the third part, which is basically where the rubber meets the road for applications that are promoted, are being able to delight users, right? So does the application have a wow factor? When you open it up, you go, oh my goodness, this is like the best thing since sliced bread, right? You want to make sure that you have a way to do that. Does the design of the application, is it visually appealing? Is it useful? Is it intuitive? Everything else like that. And then finally, the third one, and I sort of shouldn't have put Windows Phone 7 platform features, but platform features in general, right? Does your application make use of the features of the platform that you're targeting, whether that's Windows Phone, iOS, Android, whatever, right? So what I mean by that is, are you making smart use of things such as the gyroscope or the GPS device or the camera, all sorts of different things like that? What are you doing that makes your application stand out? All those three things determine how much delight the user has within your application. So with that, hopefully that was enough to get you going on on marketplace strategies and things like that. Now we need to build all the apps, but in addition to that, we need to market all the apps and find ways to get promoted. So without further ado, what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to go to the next slide, because while you see this slide, then we can do Q&A and everything else like that. Basically, the intent here is that at the end of this session, when you decide to get off the webcast, you can go to these links and fill out the forms, and you can potentially win prizes such as phones and Xbox bundles. And likewise, if you want to talk to me outside of this forum, more than happy to do that. All you got to do is contact me on Twitter or via email, and then we'll move forward from there. So I'm just going to exit this temporarily so I can get to my main panel to check the chat. And I'll just see if there's anything here that I can provide some information. Okay. So I should probably move out of the way here so people can see. Okay. Just looking through. Yeah, I was looking for that coffee as well, that big jug. I think that was awesome. So if I find it, I'll let you guys know. So, and do I have a severe coffee addiction? I just might. You never know, right? Let's see here. Okay. Keith, I think, is there another webcamp after this one? I believe so. I think there's at least a couple more after this, actually. So thank you, Matthew, for the kind words and everything. Oh, is this the same badge? Okay. Hold on. Fred, I don't know if you can put the links to the other badges. This is the one that I used that you gave me for this session, so maybe it was just misplaced. But I'll let you sort of figure that out from a link standpoint. Okay, so yeah. So if you have any questions, more than happy to answer them now. If you have any questions around application strategies for marketing and stuff like that. So just putting that back up there. And I'll get, just go to screen so everybody can see that last bit. Thanks, Fred. So has anybody seen the same types of things that I've talked about when they try to market their app or anything? Is that something that people have run into? Anything that you've seen or talked about, or is this some of it is new? And by the way, which of these tactics is still applicable during beta or alpha process? It's a good question, right? I mean, during the beta and alpha, you're not charging for your application, so it's a little bit of a different sort of slant on things. But I think, in general, the idea of driving awareness for your app is probably still something you might want to think about. And it really depends too, right? So in a beta, it depends on what you determine a beta to be. Is it a limited beta, so it's by invite only? Well, you can generate a lot of interest for your app by just providing, a limited beta and saying, sign up, and that's the way Gmail sort of did it when they first came out, right? So everybody knew about it, and everybody wanted the Gmail address, but nobody could put it. But it is something that's pretty interesting. But it is slightly different. But the idea around driving awareness, I think, is still very, very much relevant for beta, and to a lesser extent, I guess, alpha. Yeah, that's a great idea, Sebastian, Archie Coder. That's basically appdealswp.com for Windows Phone. It's actually pretty interesting how that works. Yeah. So that's just one way so you can drive awareness and market your app, right? So it doesn't only have to be yourself. Like, for example, there's some really great websites that do app reviews and stuff like that. Maybe that's the way you can do that as well. So definitely, use the media out there, whether that's like enthusiast sites that can do reviews of your app, or people that are willing to blog about your app and stuff like that. That's definitely some of the ways that you can do that for sure. Also, it's probably important, like if you're building Windows Phone apps, definitely take down my information. We can talk about ways that we can help you as well. There's certainly some ways that can work. Likewise, if you're building Android apps, you might want to find your Google representative or App Store representative for Apple to help you out with that stuff too. So definitely figure out if that's something worthwhile. And as I was saying, coming up next is responsive web design with Thomas Lewis. Thomas is awesome, and he's got a really interesting view on the web. So if you're interested in learning about responsive web design, or if you don't even know what it is, I would suggest you tune into this one because it's an awesome presentation. And Thomas is just about as funny as they come. He'll have you laughing all the way off your chair probably. So. See, there you go. There's another way to actually promote your apps through Webcamp.